Hello friends, Sumit again. This is the session 3 in the playlist Learn SQL the Right Way. Before jumping on to this session, I highly recommend that you should check the session 1 and 2 because without doing that, if you directly jump onto this, you won't be able to get much. So without any further delay, let's quickly start with the session. This is session 3 in the SQL playlist. In session 2, we covered a few things. Let's quickly recap. We talked about what is a CRUD operation, and we majorly talked about insert statements, which is like a create operation in CRUD. We talked about simple insert, and we talked about multiple inserts where we can enter multiple records in one go. Multiple insert. Okay. Apart from that, what have we seen? We have seen scenario where data type mismatch happens. Data type mismatch. Right? And then we talked about null and not null. Null versus not null. We talked about default values. Okay. And then we talked about combination of not null and default. So basically this is what we covered at a high level in session 2. In this session 3, we will talk about a few important things. What are those? Let's have a look. We will talk about primary key, and we will talk about auto increment keys, and we talk about unique key, and we will differentiate how a primary key is different than a unique key. Primary key versus unique key. So this is the agenda for this session. So let's get started. Let's talk about what if, for example, whatever table we have, this one, there can be two employees with the name, let's say, Rajesh Joshi. Two employees with the same name. How do you uniquely identify both? In this case, how do you uniquely identify both? That is where we have a concept of primary key. That means when we define a primary key, we can uniquely identify each and every record in a table. What I mean to say, let me do a select star for now to see what all is there. Rajesh Sharma. Okay. Let me again try inserting one record. I will fire the similar insert. Rajesh Sharma, another person with same age, let's say, and his salary is also same. Okay. Now, if when I say select star, you can see there are two people, different people with the same name, same age, and same salary and same location. It can happen, right? Definitely, it can happen in extreme scenarios. But then, how do you uniquely identify each person in this case? For this thing, we have a concept of primary key constraint. So, primary key. So this helps us to uniquely identify each record in the table. So what we will do is, let's drop the definition of this table. Uh, drop table employee, and let us recreate it with the right definition. Let me copy this, and now what I would do is, I want to add one more column called as employee ID, or let me just simply name it as ID. And then this will be, let's say, integer type, and this is what I want. But additionally, I do not want any duplication on this. So let me first do it. Let me first create this ID. And what I would do is I would run this and try inserting some records. So insert definition, I will copy from the previous one and will make some changes after that. Okay, so last name is Sally. I'm copying from here. So insert into employee first name, last name, age, salary. Before this, we have to give ID also. ID, and this ID is, let's say, 1. Employee ID is 1, and I would run this. So in this employee table, I have one more column ID and I have inserted a record. Rajesh Sharma, whose age is 28, salary 10,000. When I do a select star, we can see 1 Rajesh, middle name is null, Sharma 28, 10,000 Bangalore. Fine. What if I insert one more record with the same thing? It worked. And even when I do a select star, you can see this ID is 1, ID is 1. By default, it is not a primary key or something. We have to make it so that whenever we try to create one more record with that ID, it gives an error. This is what I want to show. So let me quickly drop this table. Drop table employee and recreate it by using this primary key. So what we can say here, ID int, and we just have to mention primary key. That's it. If I do this, then definitely multiple employees cannot have a repeated ID. And let me show you through describe command, DESC employee. You can see this ID is a primary key, okay, and location is a default thing where default value is Bangalore. I hope this is clear. Now, if I try running the same insert statement 2 times, 100% it won't work. Let me show that. First time it worked, but next time it will say duplicate entry 1 for primary key. A primary key says that I won't allow any null and I won't allow any repeated values. That means null is also not allowed and repeated values are not allowed. Okay, so I would write here, for a primary key, null is not allowed and also repeated values are not allowed. Let me try entering some null value just to see if it works. Okay, let me just take it as null. Column ID cannot be null. Why? Because it is a primary key. That's why it cannot be null. So primary key does not allow duplicates. It does not allow any null. So what is a good candidate for a primary key? Something based on which you want to uniquely identify someone. For example, a customer ID in a customer table, employee ID in an employees table, student roll number in a class, things like that, where you know it cannot be duplicated. I hope this is clear. Now, one more way with which we could have defined a primary key is, right now we have mentioned primary key here, right? If we do not want that, there is one more way. We could have done something like this. Towards the last row, we can mention primary key and then we mention the column name, on which column you want. This works the same way. This works the same way. There is no difference. A slight syntax change, but I am letting you know here. I hope this is clear. And now sometimes you can have a primary key on a combination of two columns. Then in that case, let's say if it is, for example, two columns, where column one is this one, column two is, let's say, something like name, we can do that way, which is like a composite primary key which is on two columns. I hope the logic and I mean the idea is similar. So you do not have to worry. So sometimes based on two columns, you want to have a composite primary key. That means a combination of these two cannot be duplicated or should be unique. We will be seeing that more in our practical demonstrations later when we talk about some quality examples once we have done the basics and all. So I hope this is fine. Now, I mean, ideally, if we are entering a new employee always, what we have to do, we have to again think that, okay, what's the, I mean, ID of the previous employee? Then we have to enter the next one. For example, you have 10 employees right now. Then you know this ID value will be 10 and you have to now enter 11. But how do you remember it has to be 11? It gets tricky to identify that. So that is why we should go for a auto increment. That means we do not have to worry. We do not give this value. What if this value can increment again and again 1 1 whenever we are inserting? Let's try to create that. So I will drop this table employee. Okay. Now let me make some slight changes here. In this, what I will do, id int, and I will say auto increment. Auto increment. That means what I'm saying, I do not want to manually give this value always. Please start with 1 and then keep on incrementing that. That's what we want. Now let me just run this. Done. And I will say describe employee. You can see under the extra column we are seeing auto increment for ID, which is primary key also. That means it won't be duplicated and it's auto increment. I hope this is clear. Now let me try entering some values for this. Of course, I cannot enter null here. So I will remove this ID because I do not have to worry really about it. Okay. Done. Select, I mean, I have done insert. And what do you expect will be the value of ID in this case? I have not manually given it. Let's check. Select star from employee 1. The value is 1 here. Let me try running insert again. Might be some other name. Kapil Sharma, let's say. What will be the ID in this case? 2. It will auto increment. You do not have to really worry about it now. So, I mean, auto increment is a good candidate for primary key because then, of course, you know, when it's incrementing all times, it will be unique, distinct. So, I hope this is clear. Now, let's talk about unique keys. What is a unique key? As the name suggests, it looks very similar to primary key. That means it holds only unique values, values cannot duplicate. Then you might question me, Sumit sir, primary key was also doing the same. Then what's really unique about this unique key? I'll tell you. Remember one thing, you can have only one primary key. You can have only one primary key, and the primary key cannot hold any null. Primary key cannot hold any null value. And ideally, we should use primary key when we have to distinctly identified or uniquely identify each record. We should use primary key when we have to uniquely identify each record. I hope it makes sense. Now I would talk about unique key. What is a unique key? Unique key also cannot hold any duplicate just like primary key, but unique key can hold null. How many null values it can hold? Now, based on databases, this might change. For example, in MySQL, in MySQL, a unique key can hold any number of null values. That means it feels that all nulls are different, unknown value, right? But in some of the other databases, it holds only one null, only one null. In some of the other famous DBs, unique key hold only one null. We cannot give more nulls to that. But since we are using MySQL, you will be able to find that you can give any number of null values to a unique key. And what is the whole purpose of unique key? Unique key is to make sure that you do not get repeated values. For example, email IDs. You do not want to differentiate each user based on email ID, but you want to make sure if someone has taken an email ID, other cannot take it. Right? So the purpose of unique key is to make sure the values do not duplicate. But the purpose of primary key was to make sure we can uniquely identify a record. Right? One more important thing, you can have unique keys on more than one column. That means there can be 3 columns where you have different unique keys. But in case of a table, we can have only one primary key. Now you might get confused with a composite column or where 2 columns together have a primary key. That's a different thing. But still we have one primary key, right? So we can have only one primary key but multiple unique keys in a table. We can have only one primary key but multiple unique keys in a table. For example, when we talk about an employee table, I would say employee ID can be the primary key, employee email can be a unique key. Make sense? It would make, right? So that's how it is. So now what we can do, let me show you a random thing. For example, let me take this table and let's change few things. Let's say first name, middle name I am removing, last name, age. I am just taking all of this. Okay. And now I want to create, let's say, a primary key on these 2 columns, first name and last name. That means what I am saying, a combination of first name and last name has to be unique. Ideally, it might not be the scenario in real world, but let's think that this is a scenario. Then what we have to do? Primary key, and then we can say first name, comma, last name. This is what we can definitely do. Now let me try first dropping this table, drop table employee, and now I would create this table. Okay, I have created this table and now I will say describe table, describe employee. You can see the primary key is on a combination of first name and last name. Now I will try inserting this thing, records, insert into employee Let me not give explicit list of columns because I want to insert for all. So values, and then I would say Kapil Sharma, okay, and age 28. And let me give a semicolon towards the end. Oops, okay. Will it work? Yes, it would. Now, if I run it again, will it work? Let's say if I say Kapil Sinha, will it work? Yes, it would. A combination of first name and last name is unique. But what if I say Kapil Sharma again? Will it work? Duplicate entry Kapil Sharma. See, it's concatenating first name and last name, and that is now the primary key. So I hope how a composite primary key works, composite key works. This should be clear. So I think we should be good. Now similarly, if you want to give a unique constraint, what you can do, instead of doing like this primary key, you can say unique key. You can say unique key. Now whatever we have right now, in this can we enter, let's say, null? Not this single. Because primary key do not allow null. Remember that point. It cannot be null. I hope this is fine. And moreover, we have explicitly given not null. Okay. Now let me remove this not null constraints also. And let me create this. First of all, let me create a unique key on single column. Let's say, let me have ID also. ID. ID is what? Int. And I'm saying unique key. This is what I am trying to have now. ID, first name, last name, age. And now let me try running this. First, I will drop this table. Drop table employee. I would recreate this table now. And I will say DESC employee. You can see this ID is a unique key now. And of course, unique key will allow null. Let me try inserting the records. What I would say, insert into employee values. I will say, let's say 1, first name is Kapil, second name, last name is Sharma, and age is 20. Let me just run. This will definitely work without any second thought. Now, if I run this again, will it work? It won't. Duplicate entry 1 for key ID, because we have applied a unique key constraint. It cannot have duplicate values. And what if we put null here? Will it work? Yes, it would, because it allows null, and in MySQL it allows any number of nulls also. I will say select star from employee. You can check that out. But if ID would have been a primary key, you would not be able to enter this nulls. Right? So I hope you got a right idea that, let's say, if you are having an employee table, employee ID can be primary key, and only one thing can be a primary key, not more. And in that case, phone number, email address, all of that can be unique keys, because we do not want duplicates among them, but we want to uniquely identify each employee based on employee ID. So that's the difference between primary key and a unique key. I hope with this you would have got complete clarity on how exactly it works. And you can have a unique key constraint on multiple columns also. I mean a combination. See, of course you can have on multiple columns, but I'm saying combination is also allowed. For example, we could have said instead of having unique key on this, we can say unique key, and then let's say if we want it on a combination of ID and first name. I mean, logically it does not make sense, but this can be done. Fine, then in this session we have covered a lot. So let's see what all have we covered. And in this session, we talked about primary key, auto increment keys, and you can just understand that auto increment is a very good candidate to be a primary key because we do not have to worry about increasing the value. It will automatically be incremented. We talked about unique key and how a unique key is different than a primary key. Remember, we can have just one primary key in a table, but we can have more than one unique keys. And the role of primary key is to make sure that we can uniquely identify a record in a table. But unique key has a different purpose. It is to make sure we have distinct values for a column. So with this, let's wind up and I hope you enjoyed the session. तो फ्रेंड्स, कैसा रहा सेशन? अभी तक सब्सक्राइब नहीं करा यार, अब तो कर लो, किस चीज का वेट कर रहे हो? सी यू इन द नेक्स्ट सेशन.